Today we're talking with Mr. Smith, who is a technology administrator in a suburban district outside of Atlanta. And he's going to tell us a little bit about goings on with BYOT, or Bring Your Own Technology initiatives in his district. So welcome, Mr. Smith. Thank you for talking with us today.
Well, thanks for bringing me aboard to help answer some questions for you guys.
Okay, so could you tell us a little bit about your role in the initiative so we can just understand your relationship with it?
Okay, well, I'm an instructional technology specialist for our school district. We have 50 schools in our school district. We have 4 instructional technology specialists that basically work as a professional development with teachers. We help teachers with their instruction in their classroom and find innovative ways to use technology in their instruction. And one of the ways that we do that is through BYOT. In the past couple of years, we've our upper leadership in our school district has changed. So our vision and acceptance of BYOT has evolved since then. Initially, we had one innovative principal that had made his school wireless and was starting to do BYOT, and then that principal moved into the assistant superintendent role and helped foster more of a vision for that happening, school system-wide. And so now with that coinciding with a SPLOS being passed in the past school year, we're in the process of making all 50 of our schools wireless. We currently have the school that he was at, and he was able to, through his own local funding, find a way to make that happen. And then we have 4 additional schools that went wireless last year. And then we hope to have 12 to 17, I don't think it's quite been decided, schools fitted for wireless for the next school year.
Okay. And is it just sort of assumed that once they're wireless, they become BYOT schools, or they have BYOT classrooms in them?
Well, I guess, since we're more of a suburban district of Atlanta, majority of our schools, with cinder block walls, they can, students can bring in their own, as far as, let me back up, students, from a county perspective, students can bring their own technology into classes now. It's left up to that local administrator whether or not the students can bring it in or not, and then have it in their classrooms. But it's kind of hard if their school's not wireless, because they don't really get a cell phone signal in those classrooms unless the school's wireless to begin with. So it just kind of helps facilitate it more if there's Wi-Fi that the students can tap into with their own devices. Right,
into their own internet provider.
Well, I mean, if they're, if they got a connection at their school that doesn't have wireless, which is pretty shoddy because of the way, I guess, the buildings are designed hard, and the locations of most of the schools are kind of not necessarily in a strong, wireless connection, I guess, from their cell phone towers. Makes it hard for them to be connected. Mm-hmm. That's why it's pretty essential that all of our schools get wireless, so that we can do that. And then the other side is it's increasingly hard for schools and school systems to outfit our schools with technology. And so from a financial standpoint, it just makes sense to build infrastructure there for schools to allow students to bring their own devices, just so you can, bring more technology into the classrooms. Because if you allow the students to have those, then, it'll come. And on the other side of it, for teachers, instead of squashing students having devices and then always having students, sneaking around, texting under their desk or whatever, holding their hands under the desk, texting, when you embrace it and you have students that are, engaging with that technology, then it's much easier to manage those devices in your classroom because they're out and they're open instead of being hidden.
Okay. So, here in Carrollton City Schools, from what I've heard, it's a small district too,
Hmm?
but they've got a few pilot BYOT classrooms, probably in the junior high and the high school. How is it spread out in your school? Like, do you have a few pilot classrooms that have been doing it for a few years that could you maybe tell us about one if you do?
Well, we have, the one school that has been forward thinking for a few years that have, been doing BYOT, but it's more.
What's the grade level? What's the grade?
It's a middle school, 6 through 8. And
Okay.
but it's more of, teachers that are willing to allow students to do this. It's not. I mean, the administrator there said, okay, this is an option for you to do while, you have your class. It's not forcing teachers to, to do BYOT every day, in all of their lessons. It's just saying, here's another resource that you can use in your class. And so, more or less just putting it back on the teacher to say, this is something that you can use. And then recently, this current school year, bringing on board with 4 more schools, and really, from my perspective, being able to be there to help support those administrators to lead that in the building, because, really, if you don't have that administrative support, that principal in the building for those teachers, it's hard for a lot of teachers to maybe either see the value or know that they're going to be supported in doing that work with their students.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have any BYOT going on in high school classrooms?
Yes. One of the new schools is a high school, and then I would assume next year, out of those 12 to 17, there would at least be two or three high schools in that list.
Okay.
But, these would be elementary through high school.
So the acronym BYOT kind of seems to stress like the individual bringing in their very own technology, and they control it. But do you see an age, like a cutoff year in terms of age, where students should not be totally in control the way that acronym suggests? I mean, not that in any classroom they're probably not going to be totally in control, but is there some age level where the teacher needs to be the one that's managing the technology and in charge of it, and there should be no BYOT kind of concept? Does that make sense, what I'm asking?
So you're just saying, is there a grade level where it should be a cutoff where they're not allowed to?
Yeah, like do you see BYOT being appropriate in a second grade classroom, for example?
I think it.
Or third?
I think it lends itself to the teacher. It just. Really. I don't see it being restrained to a grade level. I think it's more restrained to the competency of the teacher and how well they can integrate the technology into their lessons and the work that they have their students do and produce. I've seen kindergarten classes where they've used it, with iPads or whatever different type of tablet device where they've, have those as different stations where depending on if it's a reading station, a math station, science station, using different apps to do whatever, the standards are that they're working on at that time. It just depends on, the competency of the teacher and how comfortable they are and how well they embrace the technology that they use in the classroom.
Okay.
Obviously, there would have to be more, I guess, they have more, structure there to help keep up with the devices if it's a under third grade type of a classroom.
Okay. Can you give us a visual picture maybe of what a BYOT classroom looks like in terms of like the variety of devices and maybe the types of things that a teacher has students doing?
Okay. So for the most part, usually a lot of your BYOT, honestly, it happens in middle schools because high school teachers, let's be frank, they're not very open to change. And elementary school teachers are, they're open to change a lot in the way they do instruction, but sometimes technology seems to, I think, kind of scare them a bit. And so where I've seen the most success is in a middle school. And in middle schools, just like in high schools, you'll see a wide variety of devices, but the majority of them will be cell phones. You may have, some tablets, iPads or different types of Android tablets, but for the most part, it's going to be, your smartphones, your iPhones, your Android phones. You may have some of those different gaming devices like the Nintendo DS. You'll see those in a lot of elementary schools, and students will bring those in. Basically anything that you can get on the Wi-Fi with, students will bring in. An example of different things that teachers can use with those devices. Two quick ones off the top of my head is cutoff, which is like a student engagement app that they can download, or via the web, on any type of computer they can log in, and teachers can use that to, it's basically like a classroom response system, but you don't have to pay for it. And students can use that with teachers, and you can do quick, as a teacher, do quick feedback, or you can actually build quizzes that students can take, and then obviously it automatically grades it for you. And then on the other side of that, Edmodo is a great app or website that teachers can use in their classrooms. Is like basically, it has the look and feel of Facebook, but, and it has that look of a social aspect to it, but really it's a very basic LMS that teachers can use to engage students in a variety of ways. That's because it has the look and feel of Facebook, it has a very easy learning curve for most teachers.
Mhm. Okay. I've taught in K-12, and just the thought of going in and having a BYOT Spanish class or English class, I can see the benefits, but I'm terrified of sort of the classroom management aspects. Do you have any suggestions for? Think of what a showstopper would be if somebody's Android device is freezing up and not working, and you don't know how to fix it. You don't know what they did, and you don't have time to stop whatever it is everybody's doing. If you've got one Android kind of messing up over here and a Kindle Fire over here that's, going kaput, or who knows what it's doing, it seems very distracting to me. But maybe I'm old school. So can you talk a little bit about how teachers manage this?
So, if I'm doing a lesson, I guess it just depends on what it is that I'm using the technology for. Just any good teacher that uses technology on a daily basis always has a backup plan. So whatever it is that I'm doing, probably have a paper way of being able to do it, or I can, instead of the student doing it as an individual, they do it, in a pair. There's lots of other ways that you can get around, whatever it is that you're having your students do. I guess an example would be, Socrative is a great app that you can use on iOS and Android devices for classroom engagement with students. But, if you're in a classroom where all the students don't have a device, they're the way that one's built is a student puts in their responses, gives those answers to the teacher, and then they can pass their device to the student next to them for them to use the same device quickly and put in their responses for the teachers to be able to see. So, I guess it just depends on, the answer is it depends.
Yeah. Are there any policies, like if you're in a class with, a BYOT classroom and one student doesn't have a device that day because maybe their mom had to take the device and needed it that day, are the other students compelled to share their technology? Are they? No. I think it's their property.
Yeah, that's the teacher, and I think it's on the teacher, and it's probably the atmosphere that they build in their classroom. If I was in a classroom and I think, just I guess in the settings when I was in the classroom, it was more, my students were in there and we were a family together and we helped each other. And so I would like to think, I'm sure I always would have a couple of, outstanding students who would probably not feel comfortable doing that, but most of them would share, with other students.
Okay, so what about issues of students not having technology? What if you have a student that has a family that cannot afford any technology? Does the school compensate and have a sort of a set that they will issue to people, or?
So the way that our current model of technology is trying to update, as the new schools are getting updated with wireless, they're also getting updated with all new technology in their buildings. And the way that we're doing it now is, I don't know if you've ever heard of in computing, and it's where you buy a computer and then you attach basically kind of like a network card in the back of that computer, and it kind of makes it like almost like its own little mini server, and then you can attach additional monitors and mice and keyboards to that one computer. So instead of just having one computer station off of one computer, you can have 4 stations or 8 stations, depending on how much money you want to spend and the capability of the machine. And so the model that we're working on now, as we roll out new technology, we would like to be able to put one in-computing station, which would have 4 student stations there in every classroom as we update those buildings. So in doing that, hopefully, if a teacher is using BYOT, I would venture to say, even in low-income schools, you're going to have close to 80, once you get it going, you're going to have close to 80% participation, with those students bringing in their own devices. And so hopefully with those other stations and then whatever other technology you would have in the building, you'd be able to supplement that.
Can teachers assign outside of class, or do they kind of keep internet-related research in the school day?
Well, the way a lot of schools have done it, especially our pioneer of BYOT in our school is we would, obviously we have a good library system that, the students could take advantage of. But on the other side of that, if they probably don't have a device and they don't have internet at home, then they probably don't have the means to be riding to the library every night either. And so, we, in those situations, we have it, where we open up the school earlier or leave a lab open later in the day for those students to come in earlier and do some of those work in the computer lab or the media center that we have in the schools there as well. Okay.
That's a good solution. It seems like there would be problems a little bit between Android and the iPad world, the iOS app world, because sometimes there's some really cool Apple apps, but Android doesn't get them, and sometimes it's even vice versa.
Right.
So it sounds like you can count on most of these devices to have access to the internet and websites like the Socrative website and the Edmodo website, but then there might be a little bit of conflict when it comes to using apps. Do you see that? Do you see that happening a little bit in classrooms?
Yeah, it can happen. I mean, but again, that goes back to the teacher. If there's an app that he or she really wants to use and it's just iOS, then she needs to, if there's something that's essential, then figure out a way to use it with the devices that you have. Instead of it being an individual thing, then maybe it's a paired or, a small group of 3 or 4 that work on a single device and, work on it together. You just have to, if it's that good, then you got to be good or creative in the way that you deliver that instruction.
In terms of strategies for using them, do you see any strategies teachers use where they say, okay, everybody, put your devices on the front table and we'll have our technicians load the apps for the day, or how do they manage that kind of process where it's like, okay, I need you to have the bird watching app.
So,
do they assign it for homework, or is it done as part of the classroom business?
So, if it's a true BYOT school and it's a device that belongs to the student, then the student is totally responsible for it. I don't know of any school districts that have BYOT. The technicians do not touch any of the machines. It's the student's responsibility to load whatever app it is or whatever software that the teacher wants to use, and that's all on the student. But as far as classroom management, I have seen teachers that, will take like a note card and tape it down to the top, left-hand corner of their desk, and that's called the parking lot. And whatever, classroom management skills or however the routine is in that classroom, the teachers say, okay, devices down in the parking lot. And they put all their devices face down in the parking lot, to be able to move on to whatever the next activity is the teacher does.
I like that. That's such a simple but effective sounding solution.
Mm-hmm.
Just something like so that makes sense. That's really given me a concrete idea of a few things that teachers can do and some of the issues. Have y'all seen any evidence, even just anecdotal, that this is a beneficial approach?
You mean as far as hard data?
Well, it doesn't have to be hard for me, but sure. Do you have anything that indicates that it might be good, or are we just catering to students because they like to punch buttons?
To be honest, I don't know if we have plans for collecting different data, but I don't think it's geared towards seeing whether or not if it's BYOT that's affecting or whatever the instruction going on in the classroom and those achievement scores.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, there would be reports we could run and compare those schools that have BYOT as compared to those who don't. But there's just so many different factors there, that it's so hard to pinpoint. I don't even know because I'm not that high up in the ranks to be able to know whether or not there's going to be perception surveys, given to students or teachers.
At this point in 2013, it's still very new, and so you've got to just try things out before you judge them.
But on the flip side, it seems to me like it's whether the data is there or not. These are the tools that students need to know how to use because that's what they're using every day anyway. And that's what they're going to use in the workplace. And so for teachers to be stuck still using paper and pencil, it's just kind of, it's asinine to me.
Yeah, I agree with you. What do you think? Think about a new teacher. They've got all this stuff that they've been taught over 2 to 3 years of teacher prep classes. They're really excited, but they're probably nervous. And then you throw in this idea of, oh, you might be in a BYOT classroom, within the first 5 years, or you might have that opportunity.
Right.
What would you have any recommendations for what new teachers need to know or do in order to prepare for this?
As far as, I don't really think there's anything they do to prepare. Obviously if they're in schools when they're doing their student teachings or their practicums, and the technology is available, I would tell them to embrace, all the opportunities that they have when they're in those practicums and they're in those student teaching situations, and use it as an opportunity for them to learn, but, also learn it. Keep in mind, you're probably going to be educating, those teachers that you're working with at those schools because, there is a hesitancy there a lot of times with your veteran teachers to embrace something new and those different technologies and use it as a means to go in there and to kind of help. They're helping shape your instruction and how you teach as a teacher, but, it can be reciprocal, too, in the way that you help expand some of the work that they do in their classroom.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I would recommend to them, as being pre-service teachers, soon, hopefully within a year or two, they're going to be ready for the workforce. And, they're going to be going and interviewing with principals and assistant principals looking for jobs. And, don't be afraid to ask those principals and those assistant principals, especially if you like using BYOT and you like, integrating technology in your classroom, ask them how their school actually does that. Use that as a process where you're interviewing that principal or assistant principal too. And, and if you have the luxury of being, picky and helping figure out where you want to work because you're such an awesome teacher, make that be a requirement that you look for when you look for a school. You got to find an administrator that is supportive of technology, not just giving it cursory words. Well, technology is something that we look for, but look for evidence that this is something that their teachers do, because a lot of principals will talk that they believe in technology, but you really have to look for those results and what those teachers and their students do in those schools to know whether or not it really is happening.
So thank you so much for talking with us today,
Okay.
Mr. Smith.
No problem. No problem.